Pewaukee District Commission meeting, and we'll have a roll call.
Commissioner Strelchuk?
Here.
Commissioner Bushy?
Here.
Commissioner Meyer?
Here.
Commissioner Worth?
Here.
Commissioner Giral?
Here.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Here.
Commissioner Schneider? Here. Commissioner Nurbin?
Here.
Commissioner Abendroth?
Here, we have a quorum. The first item is the approval of the meeting minutes from June 13th.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Next item is Resolution 3470, a resolution rejecting the bids for the 5020 West Parkview Drive Sanitary Lift Station B and Sanitary Force Main Replacement Project. Need a
To
motion?
reject.
Pardon?
Move to reject.
Second.
Motion and a second to reject the bids. Is there any discussion?
No.
Do we need a roll call on this?
No.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Resolution 3470 is adopted. Resolution 3471, a resolution approving the award of a contract for the 2017 sanitary sewer rehabilitation lining project to Visu Sewer of Pewaukee in the amount of $126,165.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Do we need a roll call on this?
Yeah, you're spending money.
Yeah, you're spending money.
Okay, a roll call for this one.
Commissioner Strelchuk?
Aye.
Commissioner Bushy?
Aye.
Commissioner Meyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Worth?
Aye.
Commissioner Giral?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Schneider?
Aye.
Commissioner Nurbin?
Aye.
Move to
Commissioner
adjourn.
Abendroth?
Aye.
Move
Just
to
want you to know, we've never had so many people at a sewer utility district meeting before.
Set a new record.
Or one substantive. Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Thank you.
All right. Break time.
It's just a wicked comb over in there. It's like one of those where it starts here and it wraps all the way around the neck. It catches a breeze in one scene, and it's like 3 feet long when it totally unfurls. It's pretty funny.
Get your mallet out.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking time to come out and visit with us tonight. I'd like to call to order the Common Council meeting for Tuesday, September 12th, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's have a roll call.
Your Honor, I'd like to make a motion to suspend
Need a
the
roll
rules.
call first.
Oh, roll call? Okay.
Yeah.
Alderman Strelchak?
Here.
Alderman Bushy? Here. Alderman Meyer?
Here.
Alderman Worth?
Here.
Alderman Garrow?
Here.
Alderman Hawkins?
Here.
Alderman Schneider?
Here.
Alderman Nurbin?
Here.
Mayor Abendroth?
Here. We have a quorum. Alderman Nurbin.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules to take up agenda item 4A.
You have a second?
I
The
second.
mayor's comments.
I'll second it.
Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and take up item 4A. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I appreciate that. I'm sure other people do as well. Item 4A is the mayor's comments. Those of you who were at the Taste of Mequon this past weekend know what a terrific event that was. So I would like to publicly thank the people responsible, the festivals committee who organized that fine event, the city employees who worked all day and all night to make sure that it ran smoothly, the vendors, the artists, the musicians that came and performed and served food for everybody, and a special thanks to the Mequon-Thiensville Education Foundation who ended their fun run, color run at the festival. That made for a wonderful time for everybody. So thank you for everyone, including all the sponsors who helped pay for this. Thank you for making that such a wonderful event. And we have a couple of proclamations. A proclamation honoring Fiddleheads as Ozaki Economic Development's 2017 Small Business of the Year. Whereas Fiddleheads is a family-owned and operated business which was started in 1996 in a historic 1830s cobbler's cottage located in Thiensville, Wisconsin. And whereas Fiddleheads has grown from one coffee cafe to 5 retail locations located in Cedarburg, Mequon, Glendale, and Thiensville with a total of 25 employees. And whereas Fiddleheads has developed a wholesale and retail coffee roasting business as well as an artisan bakery specializing in pastries and bread. And whereas is a strong community supporter, participates in Mequon and Thiensville events, and is a member of the Mequon-Thiensville Chamber of Commerce. Now therefore be it resolved, be it proclaimed that the City of Mequon congratulates Fiddleheads on receiving the Ozaki Economic Development Council's 2017 Small Business of the Year Award and wishes Fiddleheads continued success with roasting and brewing great tasting coffee. So congratulations to Fiddleheads. We also have a proclamation for Ferry Chasm. It's one of the neighborhoods here in Mequon. Is anybody here from Ferry Chasm? Well, yay. Okay, somebody's going to get this, so you get to pick. You get to pick. This is an interesting story. Whereas Gordon Hubbard, a Chicago land speculator, purchased 146 acres in the Michigan Territory from the U.S. government in 1835. And whereas an investment group led by Jacob Donges of Milwaukee later purchased the same 146 acres in what was then known as the town of Mequon in the state of Wisconsin. And whereas on September 13th, 1892, Jacob Donges incorporated the 146 acres as the Fish Creek Park Company in an area he called Ferry Chasm after watching his daughters play in the ravine. And whereas the Fish Creek Park Company sold shares to wealthy investors who created summer residences in Ferry Chasm, and whereas the Franker family of Illinois moved to Ferry Chasm in 1924 as the first year-round residents of the area. Whereas the portion of Ferry Chasm located to the south of Fish Creek was annexed by the village of Bayside in Milwaukee County in 1955.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah. In an action later declared to be legal by the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin. In 1957, Mequon became a city, so they couldn't do that anymore. Whereas North Ferry Chasm residents transferred ownership of their private road to the city of Mequon in 1970, and whereas the Fish Creek Park Company was dissolved in 1971 and ownership of the 20-acre Ferry Chasm Ravine was transferred to the Nature Conservancy, and whereas North Ferry Chasm has become one of the truly historic and distinctive neighborhoods in the city of Mequon. Now, therefore, I, Dan Abendroth, Mayor of the City of Mequon, do hereby congratulate the residents of Ferry Chasm North on this, the 125th anniversary of their creation as a truly unique and historic City of Mequon neighborhood. Congratulations to the residents of Ferry Chasm. I need a volunteer from Ferry Chasm to come up here and accept this.
Mayor, I think this young man should take it. He's one of the newest residents. Go on up. Too late.
Congratulations, yes. You can pass that around the neighborhood. I don't know what you do with it, but, all right, excellent. All right. Moving back to the regular agenda, and we have public hearings. The first public hearing is for ordinance 1493, amending a planned unit development approval for the Lexington Square development located at 11649 North Port Washington Road to allow LTD uses within the south elevation of a building. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in July, and the first reading was before the Common Council in August. I need a motion to go into
Move to go into public hearing?
Second.
Motion and second to go in public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Does anyone wish to address the council on this item?
Move to close.
Second?
Too early.
That one's-
All right. My name is Steve Richmond. I'm a resident of the Eastbrook condominium and a member of the board, which is directly west of the subject property. We appeared at the Planning Commission and also are appearing here, neither in support nor opposition to this ordinance, but just to, which it's our understanding from conversations with the city and from the presentation to the Planning Commission, is basically for a fairly small modification. And we have no objection to that. However, from our experience with other developments on Port Road, including the Taco Bell development, we don't want to make the same mistake that we made in that situation where we didn't pay attention, and we just wanted to register our concern and that we will be following the development of this parcel as time goes by. So we just wanted to make an appearance to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Richmond. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the commission? Seeing none.
Move to close the
Second.
Motion second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Ordinance 1494, an ordinance amending the city's zoning code regarding conditional uses in the limited use district. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in July, and the first reading was before the Common Council in August.
Move to go into closed session, or open,
Second.
excuse me, public hearing.
Second?
Motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Does anyone wish to address the council on ordinance 1494? Seeing none.
Motion to close. Second.
Motion second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Ordinance 1496, amending the city's zoning code regarding use regulations in Section 58-301 of the Town Center zoning and Section 58-303 specific development standards. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in August, and the first reading was at the Common Council in August.
Motion to go into public hearing.
Motion and second to open the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Does anyone wish to address the council on this matter? This will allow microbreweries in the town center.
Motion to close.
Second.
Motion and second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That hearing is closed. 1497, an ordinance amending the city zoning code to rezone the 10-acre property located at 12431 North Green Bay Road and immediately west of 12431 North Green Bay Road from R1 to R3, R1 and R3 to R6, suburban residential attached, and PUD, a planned unit development. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in August, and the first reading was at the Common Council in August.
Motion to go into public hearing.
Second.
Motion second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing.
Motion to close.
Wait a minute, we have a couple people that registered for
sorry.
that one. You have 2D?
Got no rhythm.
Well, if you registered for this, you can speak. We lost the sheet.
My name is James Wilkie. I live at 12434 North Cedarburg Road. And at the last meeting, I pretty much spoke of my concerns, which I'm sure are on the record. Since then, Mr. Hoff has presented me a revised plan of the property, which eliminated the access off Cedarburg Road and changed the location of a couple of the buildings and changed the size of the cul-de-sacs a little bit to free up a little more space between my property and the complex proposed. And I guess all I really have to say is, I don't have much to say as long as it kind of goes that way. I'd like an opportunity to speak again if it doesn't, just to drive home my points that I made at the last meeting. Is that okay?
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council on this item? It's a condominium project on Green Bay Road, the old city property.
Move to close the open hearing.
Second.
Motion second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Your Honor, I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules and take up that item. In part so, I mean, there's going to be a long discussion that follows in the next one. We have one or two people for that last item that are here, and to wait through the long discussion might be unfortunate for that.
I'll second that.
Motion second to suspend the rules, take up ordinance 1497. This is an ordinance amending the zoning code to rezone the 10-acre property at 12431 North Green Bay Road and immediately west of 12431 North Green Bay Road from R1 and R3 to R6 planned unit development.
Could we add, I missed the fact, there was somebody who spoke about A also. Should we take up both of those items?
Which
They
one?
should be relatively brief, A and D. Is that a friendly amendment?
I think he was satisfied with A, he just was observing it.
Yeah, but if he's going to sit and observe, probably doesn't want to observe for the next hour or so.
Okay.
A and D.
Should take a second motion on that.
You mean the LTD?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so I think you want to take A and B
And B.
because they're
A and
related.
D.
We
Okay.
voted already, so.
A and D. Motion and a second to suspend the rules, take up ordinance 1493 and 1497.
Yes.
Correct, okay. First one is 1493, ordinance amending a planned unit development approval for the Lexington Square development located at 11649 North Fort Washington Road to allow LTD uses within the south elevation of the south building. Recommended by the Planning Commission, first reading in August.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion second to approve. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Alderman Strelchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins, Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nerben.
Aye.
It's 8-0, and that passes. We now take up ordinance 1497, amending the zoning code to rezone the 10-acre property at 12431 North Green Bay Road.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins, Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nerben,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Aye.
Your Honor,
8-0, and that item is adopted.
I have to recuse myself on the next item. There is the consent agenda that's kind of in the middle of 1495, so I guess I would move to suspend the rules and take up the actual ordinance immediately after the public hearing, so I don't have to come and go.
Second.
And public appearances.
Yeah, well,
Well, okay.
So in other words, do the
That's a
public
motion and
hearing.
a second.
to have the actual ordinance immediately follow the public hearing.
Well, there's personal appearances that somebody is here for as well.
Oh, okay, I'll move to do that first, then take the two up together. Does that work?
That works.
We'll have the public hearing,
I'll say, do the public appearances, and then take up
the ordinance. Okay, I understand.
Correct.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We now have a public hearing for ordinance 1495, an ordinance amending the city
Public
zoning.
appearance.
No,
Public appearance, then the ordinance.
no, they want to wait
Oh, they do, okay.
Yeah.
All right, then don't move then.
for the public hearing. Correct? Yes. Ordinance 1495, amending the city zoning code to rezone the property located at 2100 West Ranch Road from C2 General Conservancy to R3 Single Family 1 Acre. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in August by a vote of 5-3. First reading was at the Common Council in August.
I recuse myself.
Move to go into public hearing?
Second.
Motion and second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing.
I'll come get you when we're done.
I have a whole stack of
Get you when we're done.
people here who wish to register and speak on this item. Please try and be brief and to the point so everyone gets a chance and we don't all die sitting here. Karen Gunderman is opposed to the project but does not wish to speak. Richard Tyler Lamb is opposed to the project and wishes to speak.
Good evening. My name is Richard Tyler Lamb. I live at 2311 West Ranch Road. I've lived there since the fall of 2006. My property abuts the Frick property with about 220 feet along their southern border. For those familiar with the area, that is the bottom of the bike path that has been mentioned at the previous meeting. The corner of the Frick property, as you know, is part of the environmental corridor. It slopes downward as it approaches the northeast corner of my property. After periods of sustained rainfall, the soil in that low area tends to drain very, very slowly. In late winter, when the snow begins to melt, there's standing water, often several inches deep, all along the area of my property where it abuts the Frick property. In spring, soil conditions there typically range between having standing water to just being really, really mucky. I usually can't walk around in that area without watertight rain boots until Memorial Day, although we had wet spring this year, so I couldn't walk around there until mid-June. A sustained soaking rain often puts a few inches of standing water on the bike path as well as in my front yard. Suffice it to say, my yard, the bike path, and the southwest corner of the Frick property floods a lot. As an interesting side note, if you check the 2015 aerial orthophotography map of this area on SewerPAC's website, it's flooded. So you can just go right onto their website and take a look. It's right there. That whole area is just underwater. Now suppose this development gets approved. A road gets put in, along with 13 driveways, 13 roofs, 13 sump pumps, all doing their best to remove what adds up to a lot of excess water from land that originally soaked up that water. Excess water that is now mixed with fertilizer, pesticides, and road salt. Excess water that will flow into the environmental corridor, disturb the land and water beneath, and keep my property wetter for a longer time. That's just what happens when the Milwaukee River is not flooded. That's a whole different story. In June of 2008, more than 3 feet of water was at the end of Ranch Road. You could walk off my driveway, go right out into where the road crests, right in the middle of the street, and it was 3 feet deep. I didn't walk down the bike path because I was already about to overtop I had these waders on, and it was already getting to the point where it was going to go in. God only knows what was going on up at the lift station. I didn't know if it was having problems or not, and I didn't want to be sticking my hands in that, let alone my whole body. I'd leave further comments about the river as well as concerned about the lift station, but I know that there's a lot of other residents here that have a lot more to say on those subjects, so I'll keep this short. However, I would suspect that if this development is approved, it will turn into a cluster of small islands the next time the Milwaukee River floods like it did in 2008. Please, don't approve this zoning change. The land is too environmentally sensitive and will leave too much of a negative impact on the properties of those who already live there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Mark Seeger is opposed to the project but does not wish to speak. Connie Bouquet is opposed to the project, wishes to speak.
Council members, I represented this area for a long time, early in the 80s and again fairly recently. I've lived in the area for 43 years, but I've lived in Mequon over 50 years, 52 years in fact. And this property has seen flooding that was just described to you in many of those years, all the way back to the 70s, 60s and 70s. Adding additional buildings to this property at this particular point in time is certainly not going to improve the conditions there. I don't care what DNR now says about that land and the high points and suggesting that in fact up to 13 houses could be built on it. It makes absolutely no sense to put more hard surface, to add more water runoff into an area that has been flooding frequently for years and years and years, especially with the environmental corridor around it. We have very little way to mitigate flooding once it begins. And to put additional houses on there, to zone, to allow additional houses does not make any sense to me. As a longtime resident and a longtime representative of the area, I would encourage you to vote no on this rezoning change.
Thank you, Ms. Bouquet. Lee Gettelfinger is opposed and wishes to speak.
Common Council members, Mequon residents, and guests. My name is Lee Gettelfinger, and I live at 11548 North Laguna Drive, directly adjacent to the property being considered for rezoning. My family and I are opposed to this change. My wife Kathy and I signed formal protest petitions against it, signed the community petition, and gathered more than 50 additional signatures in opposition. We wrote a letter detailing our concerns to all the members of the Common Council. I'd like to summarize some of the main points for everyone present today. We chose our home 13 years ago for a number of reasons. Our vision was to live on a wooded lot to raise our son in a natural environment. The neighborhood is composed of single-family homes on lots that are 1 acre or larger. We felt that Mequon valued woods, the environment, and natural spaces. Quality of life is of utmost importance to us. Preserving quality of life is the tagline on the Mequon website and newsletter. And it has been a great place to live. Wildlife abounds in this area. But we've had our struggles, primarily with water. Flooding is an issue every year. It can be especially bad in the late winter, early spring, when the ground is still frozen. Our front gully passes a lot of water from adjacent properties to the wetlands. It is more of a raging river than a gully. Over the years, it has been as wide as 50 feet and 4 feet deep with fast-moving water. All of the drainage from both sides of Laguna and the north side of Oriole Lane feed into this raging river. We added a second large culvert to our driveway, making a total of 2 3-foot diameter culverts, and regraded the gully to help alleviate upstream flooding. These culverts are big enough for me to crawl through. I have a number of concerns with this rezoning proposal. First, I'm extremely concerned with water drainage. I told you about the raging river in front of my house in the early spring. We haven't even mentioned the water flowing through my backyard, which is also a problem. Where will all this water go if the downstream drainage is no longer adequate? It will back up onto my and my neighbors' properties. Changes to this land will affect the flora and fauna of the entire area. Wetland size directly affects the richness of plant life and animal species. Adjacent land use drastically affects the wetlands. Studies from the Society of Wetland Scientists have shown that adjacent land use within 800 feet of a wetland alters the abundance of plants and affects their ability to reproduce. The rezoning proposal and subsequent subdivision plan shows that they are not building directly on the wetlands, but does show all the houses are entirely within 800 feet of a wetland. This proposal does not appear to be consistent with the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission's, or sewer PAC's, recommendations regarding environmental corridors. This is a hotly debated topic, one which the landowner may state is the crux of the argument. How is this land designated, and that there have been some previous error? Regardless, it is an environmental corridor, and sewer PAC recommends the following, and I quote, "It is recommended that the lowland portions of environmental corridors and isolated natural resource areas not be filled and be kept free from future urban development of any kind. It is further recommended that the upland portions of primary environmental corridors be preserved and protected, ensuring that the lands are not developed for urban purposes except for residential use at a density no greater than 1 unit per 5 acres. Let me repeat that, at a density no greater than 1 unit per 5 acres. This is exactly how the property is zoned today, 5-acre C2 zoning. Finally, the developer's proposal shows 3 houses directly to the north of us, all on lots that are 0.7 acres, smaller than all the lots in this neighborhood and significantly smaller than the current 5-acre C2 zoning. This will directly affect our privacy and degrade our quality of life. Common Council members, as leaders serving the citizens of our community, I ask that you consider the voice of the citizens that you have heard in opposition to this change, through letters, petitions, and the voices of the citizens of Mequon who are here tonight. I ask that you give thoughtful consideration to the proposal, consider the long-term effects in our community, and vote in opposition to this change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gettelfinger. William Nimke is opposed but does not wish to speak. Melissa Nimke is opposed but does not wish to speak. Thomas Frank is opposed but does not wish to speak. Don Edwards supports but does not wish to speak. Barb Stevens is opposed and wishes to speak.
Hello, my name is Barb Stevens, and my address is 2525 Hickory Lane. So I'm approximately a block and a half from the proposed development. The purpose for me being here tonight is that I've been in my home for about 30 years. My husband and I have raised our 2 children in Mequon, and over the years, living in such close proximity to the site being proposed, we've seen dramatic changes. The development that has gone on actually to the south of Mequon Road, much of that water flows into our neighborhood on its way to the river. In addition to that, the DNR has not necessarily been our friend in the sense that we can't dig out any of the existing ditches in the neighborhood. They consider them navigable waterways because one time a year you can float a canoe on them. So we can't get in there and dig them out, and they right now are an impediment to the drainage of the existing water that ends up in the neighborhood. In addition to that, many of the residents, because they're trying desperately to make their properties less of a flood issue, have gone and done things like French drains in their neighborhoods and things like that. All of this has put our property at 2525 Hickory in much greater danger of flooding. The properties directly to the east of us were granted permission to build, but none of them contain basements, or maybe they have a half basement in one of them, because the city recognized that they were building them in places where the flooding was tremendous in the spring. So here we are once again looking at development that once again will put certainly my property and our neighbor's property in jeopardy. We really have no recourse at this point in regard to how to reshape our property to make it better. And as a matter of fact, at the Planning Commission, a question was raised is how and why did this parcel of land remain so isolated now and so non-developed around all this development that has occurred? And it's an interesting question, but I think it's simply because the land is sensitive, and when you speculate on land, sometimes you just don't always get your way with it. And that, I think, is what has happened to this parcel of land. It is an isolated but very sensitive piece of property. So I'm asking you to very carefully protect the people who have existing homes and have had existing homes in the neighborhood for a long period of time, and to not put us in more jeopardy, because I don't know what else we're supposed to do as homeowners to protect our own investments and our own property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Brian Ginsrick is opposed and does not wish to speak. Brianna Savage is opposed and wishes to speak.
Good evening. I live at the end of Laguna Drive, 11547, and I do have a personal issue with the property, as you've heard from some of the other passionate speakers about flooding. I have a split level, so I only have a 4-foot crawl space, no full basement, and every time it rains, we can watch the water coming up the yard closer and closer to the house. In my property, the foundation of the house is higher than any part of this Frick property. So if my yard's filling up, the Frick property is filling up as well. I also have a personal problem with how the Frick family has been treated with property taxes over the decades, but tonight I want to just focus on the impact of the neighborhood. I'm not an engineer, but it's only logical that if you add a dozen houses to a swampy, marshy, semi-wetland area, it's obviously going to affect local flooding. The retaining ponds that you see on the plan, the proposed plan, the conceptual plan, those are based on road surface and roof area and driveway area to calculate that, but this is not a runoff situation. This is a fill-up situation. So I'm asking that the city take the logical and considered response to consider what is best for the neighborhood and everyone who lives there and all of their properties, as you've already heard, and I'm sure you're going to hear some more. There are many other more suitable plots in Mequon that would be better suited for a development like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Savage. Suzanne Jeffers is opposed but does not wish to speak. Bob Arnold is in support and wishes to speak.
Thank you very much. My name is Bob Arnold. I live at 12833 North Oriole Lane. I've been a longtime family and personal resident of Mequon for over 55 years and have lived in numerous locations in Mequon. I lived here before I-43 was built and had watched the first Kohl's grocery store being put up. Mequon has been, I think, one of my favorite communities that I've lived in over the years. I've watched the growth and evolution of Mequon, and it's consistently growing and improving while keeping up with the demand for the variety of housing, shopping, and commercial spaces. The city of Mequon has done an outstanding job managing the community over the years, and over the years has become one of the North Shore's and Metro Milwaukee's most desirable communities. I feel the plan for the area on Ranch Road is perfect for Mequon. It is not a subdivision, it is an extension of the neighborhood from Ranch Road and Laguna Drive. It not only fits the area, but would enhance the area. It is a controlled development with homes similar to the area that gives Mequon, the homeowners, a new potential to build new houses and people from the outside to come in. When possible, I think Mequon should look at these opportunities more and since some of the larger subdivisions being built west of 76th Street. While I have lived in Mequon, I am very interested and would love the opportunity to purchase one of these lots and be able to build a new home. That opportunity is very rare and doesn't exist. I've been very interested in listening to the homeowners in the area. I think Mequon, and you'll see southeast Wisconsin, has its problems with water because of our soil. It's a very predominantly clay soil. So it is a concern that I think all the homeowners rightfully should have. I think these developers have lived in Mequon for numerous years and have built numerous projects. And I think we at least owe it to them to hear what they're going to do to enhance the area, help the area, and maybe help the neighbors control some of their water. I think if done correctly, it can be done. One of the developments, which is Winding Hollow, is a far more challenging development when that was built, and that's in basically a huge swamp, and the topography there is much even deeper than it is where it is here. So it can be done. The improvements can be made, and I think we have two developers that are not only residents of Mequon, but are not here to hurt or harm the area, but would like to improve it. So I am in favor of it. I'd like to see with the project go forward, but I also agree with the concerns of the homeowners in the area. And I think we do need to at least listen to them, the developers, and see what they can do to prevent that and also possibly help it for the rest of the area residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Paul Clemens is opposed and wishes to speak.
Some of you all got this in an email. For everybody.
We'll share.
Pass them through. You've seen them already.
We can share.
First of all, it's the last thing I wanted to do, but you can see why I'm here. I purchased this property at 11516 North Laguna, 4 houses down from where this is going to be built. This is what runs through my backyard, not annually, all the time. That happened when it backed up in my culverts, which were built in the 60s, that are no longer adequate. But from the flooding, I can't even fix them. I've had numerous conversations with Guy, the water department, the highway department. They can't even help me on this situation because it's on my property, but you allowed to be built. What are we going to do with the people that you're going to put in harm's way, which is the same elevation as the topographical that I have, that water is going through, as Mr. Gettelfinger mentioned, who is in those pictures, who helped me change culverts, our money, our time, because I have flooded in 17 years, 3 times over a foot in my basement, without putting sewer in there. Then you can add something else from this area that could be in my basement besides just muddy water. Some pumps can't keep up. I was allowed by the neighbors to regrade, which you can see the equipment I had to rent and the money I had to spend to fix what you guys allowed in the 60s. And I am passionate. My wife asked me to behave out here. But this is why you should not build in this area, because it doesn't just flood there, it floods right down in my backyard. All the property on Oriole Lane, I appreciate you speaking, because your water has been in my basement. It comes, when it backs up on Oriole Lane, it comes down the backyard, through my property from both directions, around and under my driveway. Or over my driveway, which I didn't get pictures because they're flooded away. I lost them in a few floods, okay? The fix I've had since 2014, which are those pictures, I was able to build a swale around the back of my property where you can see my shed, which is back there because the city wouldn't allow it in the front yard where it would have been out of the floodplain, which you told me that wasn't a floodplain, but that's up 2 feet from where the normal grade was. And you can see how close it is to being flooded since I put it in there. The reason I put that in there, and he mentioned people still put things up to take up space when they had this meeting a month ago. That's where I put everything of value that I can't fit in my basement anymore, that I've had to bail out for months because of all the flooding that I've had. Every time it rains, you just saw the hurricanes. Why do you build somewhere where it shouldn't be? They have great ideas, great pictures, but that's all flooding, and others will speak to that tonight. But I would appreciate you look at those and realize what you're putting those houses in the middle of. And that's the facts right there with a picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clemens. Steve, I can't quite read that. Steve Moyer, 11432 Laguna. Sound familiar? Is opposed, does not wish to speak. Robin Schley is opposed and does not wish to speak. Irene Sullivan is opposed and wishes to speak.
This makes me real nervous. My name is Irene Sullivan, and I've been a resident on Ranch Road for over 30 years. I'm going to read a letter that I sent to Mr. Boucher, who is our alderman, and then I have a couple other things that I just want to mention. You already know my name. I'm writing to you to ask that you do not vote in favor of the rezoning the Frick property that's in question on Ranch and Laguna Roads. The flooding we experience now is truly significant. It's usually once a year, sometimes it's 2 and 3 times a year. The 5 homes for which the property is currently zoned will add to our flooding problems. But an additional 6 homes, if the rezoning is approved, will be devastating to the homeowners that are there now, to the existing homeowners. We fought major development of this property 20 years ago, and it was rezoned to C2 status. Please be mindful of the residents who have homes there, who have existing homes there now. My family and I are living proof that when flooding occurs, in addition to property loss, damage, and the inconvenience, it's truly a very real health issue. My husband became an amputee as a result of one of these floods. He developed an infection due to the bacteria found in human waste, and the amputation wound did not heal for 4 years. During that time, he developed cancer, but he could not be treated with chemotherapy because he had an open wound. And the cancer took his life, and I lost my husband, and my 4 children lost their dad. This is not an easy thing for me to do. Again, I am asking you to please vote against the rezoning of this property. 5 homes for which it's now zoned are more than enough. And that's the zoning that's there now. We're not saying that you can't build, we know that it is zoned for 5. Adding more will just be far too intense for this area. The argument about sewer pack and the erroneous information that they were given, 20 years ago, at the time of the flooding, and at the time that this property was another developer was going to develop it, sewer pack was asked to come here, and they're the ones who gave us the information about whether it was environmental corridor. It's not all environmental corridor, but it all borders environmental corridor. And they had their recommendations. So the argument of their having been given information, they don't just assume that if you call them and say, well, this is the way it is. They don't just say, oh, well, that's fine, and make their recommendation on that. We had Mr. Reed came for many times and walked through that property with many of the residents here. And then they came up with their recommendations for it. So, and I understand that everybody, this is a monetary thing. And I understand that everybody would like to have a little more money. I would too. We all would. But to acquire it at the expense of others really is wrong. So I'm asking you, please do not vote for the rezoning of this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Sheila Johnson is opposed and does not wish to speak. He Huang is opposed and does not wish to speak. David Smith is opposed and does not wish to speak. Chuck Sutton is in support and does not wish to speak. R.J. Demore is in support and does not wish to speak. Julie Rice is opposed and does not wish to speak. Dan Rice is opposed and does not wish to speak. Susan Krieger is opposed and does not wish to speak. Christine Stone is opposed and wishes to speak.
Hi, I'm Christine Stone. I live at 11360 North Oriole Lane, and I moved to Mequon 4 years ago from Riverwest, Milwaukee. Very small, dense lot neighborhood. And I moved to Mequon for the quality of life. And it just seems to me that this rezoning choice will change the quality of life for so many more than it could potentially increase it for. So I'm asking you to not rezone it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stone. Wendy Frankor is opposed and strongly opposed and does not wish to speak. Karen Kirchma is opposed and does not wish to speak. Brett Liljegrori, sorry, is opposed and does not wish to speak. Brett lives on Ranch Road. Karen Birsch is in support and wishes to speak.
I have two things. First of all, I have a letter that one of the neighbors in the area asked me to read. Bill and Mary Jo Blatz would like to go on the record as for maximum allowable development of the Fred Frick property. We live at 11237 North Oriole Lane and would be affected by this development. We have known Mr. Frick for over 20 years and have suffered through several attempts to stop this project by his neighbors. It is time to allow him and his son, Bill, to exercise their rights respectfully, Bill Blatz. And then the other thing, my name is Karen Birsch, and I'm the wife of one of the developers developing the Frick property. And I read all the information circulated by Mr. and Mrs. Schley and the notes, and I was concerned about the development. Many of our parishioners live in that neighborhood, and they're very dear to me. So my husband spent a considerable amount of time with me walking on the property. He explained the engineering reports. He discussed all the maps that were provided by both the city and the county. And I feel confident that developing the site will not cause harm to the neighbors by altering the flow of water during times of rain and thawing. And I just hope that people will listen closely and ask the developers lots of questions so they can ease their fears and show them how water would flow and where it's going.
Thank you, Ms. Birsch. Lisa Lamb is opposed and does not wish to speak. Robert Cassidy is opposed and does not wish to speak. Lisa Lilligren is opposed and does not wish to speak. Susan Futterich is opposed and does not wish to speak. These are all people from Ranch Road, just so you know. Wayne Korzeski is opposed and does not wish to speak. James Crow is opposed and does not wish to speak. Michael Kirkma is opposed and does not wish to speak. Bill Frick supports and does not wish to speak. Christine Frick Glass is in support and does not wish to speak. Michael Gmurick is opposed and does not wish to speak. Suzanne Gmurick is opposed and does not wish to speak. Jay Schauer is opposed and wishes to speak. Is Jay here? Yeah. Okay, good.
I cut my bike ride short to address the Common Council. Thank you very much. Good evening. So we've had a few Mother Nature events lately, right? And what did we learn? You know, you can't take what nature gives you and try to alter it and beat it, because eventually it's going to beat you down and it's going to win. I mean, in Florida, Houston, you know, people building where they shouldn't. These engineers think, oh, let's build a city below sea level. What happens? I don't care what these reports say. This area floods. I live on 2811 West Grace, which is the corner of Grace and St. James. It's all connected. It backs up in our area because that area backs up. If this happens, it's going to cause flooding, not just right there. I'm like 2.5 blocks away, and I'm deeply concerned. And my neighbors across the street expressed the same concern. Jeff Rennebrack, Aaron Katz, they're very, very concerned about it. So the studies may say, hey, look, we're gonna build retention ponds. It's going to be great. We're going to keep the water there. But what one of the other members said, what about the water that doesn't come from there that goes in there right now? Where is that water going to go when this development happens? So You know, studies may show all kinds of great stuff, but I just take it with a grain of salt. We live there. We know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schauer. Eric Davis is opposed and wishes to speak.
Good evening, council members. It's a pleasure to speak tonight. My name is Eric Davis, and I'm a resident at 2626 West Ranch Road. My wife and 5 kids and I have lived on that property for the past 4 years, and I've been a resident of Mequon for 35 years. I've grown up here and been a part of the growing community and watched development happen. One of the key attractive elements of Mequon that keeps my family and my business in the area is the fact that Mequon has been able to properly balance development and natural green space. My property is the first property, or 2 properties away from the proposed development, and it is just west of the Milwaukee River overflow area that then crosses right around Ranch Road. And as you've heard from many of my neighbors and residents, the area is frequently underwater, and I share their concerns about the inability to manage excess water. So water is frequently in these areas, as I mentioned, and I do not believe that a proper engineering can be done to control the Milwaukee River and the watershed area. So my request is that you please leave the zoning as is and don't compromise the value of tens, if not hundreds, of surrounding homes for the sake of 13 new developments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. James Peterson is opposed and does not wish to speak. Amy Kirkland is opposed. And Amy, do you wish to speak? Okay.
Good evening, everybody. I was here in August and I spoke, but I don't think I was clear enough because it went forward. I live at 11816 North Oriole Lane. I've lived there for over 35 years, and I am on the north side of this area. Most of the people that you're hearing from are on the south side. I'm on the north side, and I'm very close. I'm closer than the 123 Oriole Lane person. I'm right there. This area, this is the river. I've talked about this, the river to the lake. There is a whole corridor. This is not the place to build. The corridor goes all the way to the lake. It's one of the few that is still there. When we talk about profit, we talk about quality of life, and we talk about money, wetlands pay themselves in dollars that we can't even imagine. One person's profit for their property on a river area in a wetland is to enjoy it, the beauty, the fauna, the wildlife. It's to enjoy that. It's not to build on. That's not the way. It's not the time to make a profit on that. I talked about canoeing from my house on Oriole Lane all the way through Turtle Bay and into the river. 3-4 times, 4 feet of water. It's there for days. If you build more, again, we're going to have the concentration of the water, the concentration of the critters. All the coyotes, all the deers are going to get more concentrated. All the sandhill cranes, which live in this area and have for generations, will have no place to live. Isn't that what Mequon's about? One person's profit? 13 homes? Who cares? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkland. Jim Guthrie is opposed and does not wish to speak. Peter Gardner is opposed and wishes to speak.
Hi, I'm Peter Gardner. I live at 2350 West Ranch Road, and I own the property immediately west of this parcel. I have 26 acres there. I don't know why this is coming up again. We had so many meetings back in 1997 with so many people, committees, and everything else. And the conclusion was that the C2 was the way to go with this parcel. The C2 limits the development. There's still available development there. But it also gives the city control over what's going on with this parcel. It's wet. I've lived there for almost 35 years now, my wife and I, family. When we have rains, more than a day or two, I have a river running across part of my yard, coming from the east, which is that parcel. The area around here does what it's supposed to do. The river goes up, and the river backs up into this area. It's a wetlands, it's a floodplain. But we do end up water coming, not flowing out to the river, but coming from the river into this area. And it doesn't go away. It sits there, and it takes days before it starts to go down again. It's all related to what's going on with the Milwaukee River. We had a culvert update in the area. They put new ones along Hickory, Chestnut, a big one under Ranch Road. When we get rains, heavy rains, and the ground is soaked, we get a torrent of water going through that culvert under Ranch Road. And it's not a single culvert. They put in a double concrete culvert there. And it's like something like water flowing out of a dam release gate. It pours out of there. We have culverts under Bobolink that they replaced a few years ago. That one now, because of the development to the west, when we get heavy rains, well, first of all, it used to be a dry drainage area. Now it's wet the whole time. There's water in that all the time now. When we get heavy rains, water comes pouring down there. It actually goes over the road. So I'm not sure what the city's going to have to do with that. It also goes down that giant culvert along St. James, and sometimes it gets so full it goes over that road as well. I can't believe we're talking about this again. The property is wet most of the year. And like I said, back in 1997, with all the discussions and everything, the compromise was that C2 was the way to go because this is such a sensitive area. I don't know, again, people have said, well, they have engineering studies. Well, I lived there for 35 years, and I know the water coming off of that parcel, and it's wet. And if you put 13 or an additional 6 or 7 homes up in that area, it's just going to make everything a lot worse. I also have concerns about the sewer. We have a lift station nearby that if that breaks down, all our basements pack up. I don't know about the capacity of that to be able to handle this kind of a load. But the big issue is the water. And please do not change the zoning on this. Keep it C2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Jan Dritzler Katz is opposed and does not wish to speak. Howard Schley is opposed and wishes to speak.
In 1997, 600 people signed petitions against a virtually identical proposal. I'm going to give you another 239 from just the last week or so. My name is Howard Schley. I live at 1935 West Riverbend Court. This is a bad idea. It was a bad idea when it was turned down 20 years ago in 1997, and when it was turned down in 1996, and when it was turned down in 1995. Now, before I launch into my rant here, I'd like to address something that's been suggested by the developers and even by city staff. And it's been suggested that a memo by Brad Steinke 20 years ago misrepresented that the majority of this land is primary environmental corridor, when in fact it's a portion of the land that is designated as that. And it's been suggested that the vote to impose C2 zoning in 1997 was based on this misrepresentation. Really?
You 8 council members analyze and vote on issues all the time. Do you really think that your peers 20 years ago blindly adopted C2 zoning on the basis of a single memo? Look at this room. Look at the letters you've received. Look at the petitions that we've submitted here tonight and add them to the 600 that were submitted in 1997. Look at the maps that we provided, the stories that we've shared. Do you really think that in 1997, when opposition was as large or even larger than what you see tonight, the single purpose of the vote that was taken was to define this land as primary environmental corridor? Because that's what's being suggested to you by the developers. It is patently disingenuous of them to completely ignore all of this and pretend that the decision to apply C2 zoning was some kind of clerical error. But that's their entire approach here. They've taken this property and carved it out and hung it in space and had engineers look at it and tell them, sure, you can build land on houses on this land, and you can manage inner water that falls down from the sky, so bring on the bulldozers. Everything that they have shown you ignores that this land is part of an intertwined system of wetlands, floodplain, watershed, and a huge river system that backs up onto it every time that river rises. Stormwater management does not deal with that. Those retention ponds they want to put in will probably block that water from flowing up onto the land, and then that water is going to have to go somewhere else. They've ignored the fact that this peninsula of land and the land around it is affected by development, all around it, on Port Road and Grafton and beyond, and water flowing into this parcel from all of southeast Mequon. They've drawn a 100-year floodplain line on their plan, as if the next time that water is going to cross that line will be sometime after we have a colony on Mars. And they've ignored the fact that thanks to the river, we exceed the floodplain line virtually every year, virtually every major rain event, virtually every spring thaw, sometimes by 3, 4, and even 6 feet above that line. They've ignored the existence of all these factors, and they've said, yes, we can build on this land. The engineers say we can build here. There's a difference between can and should. Engineers said the Titanic was unsinkable, and they were right, it was, if you focus on the design of the ship and you ignore the existence of icebergs. Now we, nearly all of us in this room and hundreds beyond this room, fought this fight in 1997, and it was not a fight to define some land as primary environmental corridor. That was one small fractional element, yet it's been made out to sound like this council made up of people just like you who think and reason, put on some blinders and read one memo and made a grievous mistake. That is not the case. There was no mistake. The citizens of this community spoke and their representatives listened, and this land was zoned C2 for the purpose of preventing dense development on land that is part of a system of wetlands, floodplain, watershed, and river flooding, not just stormwater management. This land should not be developed, but if it must, if money has to be made, then it should be low density, allowed only under the most stringent guidelines, the most careful guidelines and conditions. That's what C2 gave us in 1997, and that's what it gives us today. Now, throughout this fight in 1997, and again today, I've heard it said that some of the neighborhoods around this land should never have been built. Those houses never should have been built. The developer even suggested at the last meeting that those people should just move. Well, it's true. Some of the houses in this area probably never should have been built. Well, if you allow this proposal to move forward 10, 20, 50 years from now, as the problems in this fragile, interconnected system multiply, and they will, we will be saying, these houses never should have been built. So tonight, you have the power to travel back in time from that moment to this moment and make the decision that homes that never should have been built don't get built. I've also heard comments about the rights of the landowners. I've heard over and over again how they've paid taxes all these years. Paying taxes guarantees you a voice in these chambers and the right to city services. It is not a guaranteed return on investment. The pressure in this sensitive environmental system, of which this land is just one small piece, has increased as development exploded all around it. So too bad. You bought land in a wetland watershed system that's getting wetter and wetter all the time. You should have cashed in and jammed 30 homes into this parcel back in the boom days, and then all the flooding issues would be the problem of some unsuspecting home buyers. But as far as being taxpayers, I believe I'm standing in a room full of taxpayers who say no to this proposal. In fact, the taxpayers in this room collectively pay exponentially more than the landowners of this parcel pay, especially since, for the last 20 years, the C2 zoning that they now want to change has given them a lower tax assessment on the land. I ask you to look at the faces of all these taxpayers who are here tonight. Those are the faces of the taxpayers who will have to deal with the problems created by development on this property. But what's different is that they will still be here. The landowners who keep talking about being taxpayers on this parcel don't live here and will be long gone after they have cashed out. We will still be here. We will be dealing with the problems that spring from putting tons of gravel and asphalt on this property so you can build a road, and with the shifts in the land that yield unintended consequences after the bulldozer move things around, or basements are dug and soil gets spread around, or berms are built for ponds that are supposed to hold some stormwater management, except what they do is they block flooding, which now has to go somewhere else. We'll still be here paying taxes, dealing with the increases in flooding, or the overloaded sewer lift station, or the diminished aquifers, which hasn't even been brought up tonight. And the developers and the landowners whose rights you think you may be protecting tonight by voting in favor of this proposal will be long gone. C2 zoning was a wise decision based on countless factors. C2 zoning is a cautious, measured approach to building where you shouldn't be building at all. C2 zoning has the benefit of requiring conditional use approvals, which can help deal with very special circumstances on a parcel that sits in the middle of a huge interconnected system. C2 zoning doesn't deny the landowners the opportunity to cash in. They can still make their money and move on. C2 zoning gives those of us who are staying here and continuing to pay taxes some small measure of hope that the damage that's caused by those who are cashing in will be minimal. Government is often accused of being too cautious, too conservative, not progressive enough. This is one time when you are being asked by the 600 citizens who signed petitions in 1997, which are still on the record, and the 239 petitions that you received tonight, and everyone who turned out here tonight to be cautious, be careful, and keep the C2 zoning on this parcel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schley. That's it for the public hearing.
Motion to close public hearing?
Second. Motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Per our last motion, we will now take up ordinance 1495, amending the city zoning code to rezone property at 2100 Ranch Road from C2 to R3.
I was just going to say that in the packet is a memo that confirms that there were a handful of protest petitions that were filed. Those protest petitions have been reviewed by staff, have determined that they do trigger the higher voting requirement. Since that time, we did receive at least one more, maybe two more, for a total of about 53% of the surrounding land of this parcel, just to let you're aware.
Look to staff. You want to give an overview?
Let's talk water.
I guess we'll get underway. I guess obviously there was a lot of discussion about drainage, water, and Kristen's here, and we can try to work through any of your answers that you may have. But I guess I'll just address some of the questions that came up with regard to the rezoning. As many of you stated, the current zoning for that property where the upland is located is C2, which is basically, have it up on the screen, it's basically the dark line here is the C2 of the environmental corridor boundary, so the land within inside this area is where the applicant is requesting to change that zoning from a C2 to an R3. There's been discussion with regard to whether this is actually primary corridor or not. If you want to get into some of the history, I have some of the memos that were in our packet from 1997. There's also a history in there with regard to the zoning change. But I did meet with Sewer PAC in July to talk about the property, and they did determine that the upland area, which is, again, this area here, is not part of the primary corridor. And we could discuss whether that was the crux of the argument back in 1997. I mean, the memos from staff at the time did say that that was based on, the decision was based on primarily that information from Sewer PAC. So the applicant is requesting to rezone that from the C2 now to an R3, and then the PUD would allow it for a conservation design. There was a lot of talk about water and drainage, and it's a very complex area, and I do have some maps if you'd like to see with regard to some of the drainage patterns that we worked with in our engineering department. Somewhat complicated site. There's 3 drainage subbasins that drain into the area. There's a large subbasin here, which is about, I think, 800 acres. That all feeds through this location here, which is part of the Gardner property. There's also a large subbasin here that goes across the Port Washington Road, I think some of them mentioned as well. That basically comes to the north of the property and discharges in this area. And then there's a smaller subbasin, which includes the Oriole Lane Laguna area. And that, again, some of it actually goes this way and discharges in through the southern portion of the Frick property through the wetland, and then some of it actually goes across the road and discharges to the north. The upland area of this site does not have any drainage or water flow through the site. The water that does drain through this area comes through the existing wetland complex, which is shown on the, go back to the map here, which is shown on the map. This area here, which is in the hatched area, includes wetland and floodplain, and there's obviously no development within that area whatsoever. The parcel that we're talking about in terms of acreage is about 13 acres, and the overall subbasin, including those 3 areas I just showed you, is roughly about 1,000 acres. So there's a lot of water that does flow through this area, but again, a lot of it flows up in this location through here and then around through here. In terms of the plan itself, there was not much discussion about the conservation design. These are smaller lots, typically what we see with our conservation subdivisions. The applicant showing a walking path and open space around the perimeter. Again, typical what we'd see in our conservation subdivisions. I guess with that, I know there's a lot of questions you may have with regard to some of these issues, and so I would open up the floor to the council to ask any questions of Kristen or myself or Kim with regard to the project. Thank you.
Okay, first I'd like to invite the applicants to come up and make any presentations they may feel inclined to do.
To get started, okay, the clerk is passing around the documents that we brought today to address the facts of the development. Paul also has a copy of all of those documents that he can show on an easel, which either he can show to the council or to the audience, whichever you would prefer.
Could you just make sure that you're speaking into the microphone?
Yes, Okay, I'm trying to still pull out things from this beautiful bag that I brought today. Yeah, I would actually rather speak from the podium if that's okay.
It's fine. There's a microphone there too.
Yep. Yes. That's fine.
Or she's around the packet.
Good evening, and thank you. Sorry for delay doing a little setup. My name is Fred Bursch, and I am the owner of Bonnie Lake Real Estate. I'm here this evening along with my partner, Paul Apfelbach. Together, we are part of a development team that has been formed by the owners of the property, Christine Glass and Bill Frick. They are the daughter and son of the previous landowners, C. Frederick Frick and Patricia Frick, who are now deceased. We come here tonight asking you to restore the R3 zoning and approve the 13-lot concept plan for the 21-acre Frick parcel on Ranch Road. Without your support, only 6 lots will be developed under the current rezoning. We do not believe that a reduced lot count benefits the neighbors or the neighborhood in any way. Straying from my comments, we understand there are issues of localized flooding, and we are very concerned. We want people to understand that there's an issue between this property and this area. The Fricks own 21 acres in this much larger watershed as Jack Zader has presented. Paul and I are both longtime residents of Mequon. I moved to Mequon 25 years ago with my wife Karen, who, by the way, in 35 years has never gotten up and spoken for me at a public hearing. Thank you. We raised our 4 children in this community, and we truly care deeply about this community. Paul and I have both invested a lot of personal time and energy into this project and all of the other projects we've completed in the Mequon community. We love this community and have shown it through partnering with other developers and landowners on numerous development projects. We both plan on being residents of Mequon for many more years. We understand that the questions before council tonight are very difficult. Can the council support the application in light of letters from the neighbors? Can the council support the application against a formal protest petition? How will the council evaluate the engineering and other facts in order to reverse the actions of an earlier council? This requested council for the restoration of zoning from 1997 is not unprecedented. A similar request on behalf of an infill parcel in a unified neighborhood was approved by Planning Commission and Council after a similar series of meetings in 2011. Council voted to restore zoning that was stripped from a parcel in 1997 through blanket rezoning that was objected to in 1997 by the impacted landowners. In that instance, it was believed by the landowner that the attributes of the site were consistent with the character of the neighborhood and that the need for that holding zoning had passed. Just like in this case, the opposing neighbors requested to retain their new current zoning that would allow only 1/2 of the number of lots to be developed, resulting in lots twice as big or more than the surrounding lots. Like the Fricks, the landowners hired the necessary consultants and engineers before submitting a request for zoning restoration. They also obtained DNR concurrence and county septic approval. They prepared concept plans and grading plans. Like the Fricks, the landowners were hit with formal protest petitions from neighbors. There were newspaper articles, letters to the editor, passionate letters from the neighbors against the zoning, including one from a woman who wrote that the proposal was outlandish and that the 2 applicants were thugs. Petitions were signed by more people than lived in the 300-acre neighborhood.
Neighbors appeared at Planning Commission and said that the sites were wet, that they flood, that they're undesirable and unbuildable. They talked about years of public trespass and open views that would end if the zoning was restored and double the number of homes were built. Like we intend to do this evening, the landowners presented the factual information, everything they could, including expert testimony, facts, and reports. Like this project, new engineering standards and new technology was in place that required the developers to do more than they would have done in 1997. In the end, the applicant prevailed when the pre-1997 zoning was fully restored by the City Council based on those facts. We believe that the council did not vote for the landowner or against the neighbors. Rather, we believe they voted in favor of the consistent and orderly development of a Mequon neighborhood. We ask the council to do that very thing this evening. Consider the compelling facts presented to you by engineers, consultants, governing bodies, and city staff that show that there is no harm to the city or the neighborhood if this parcel is developed with 13 lots instead of 6. To give this request adequate consideration, we would like the City Council to look at the attributes of the Frick parcel. Paul and I want to develop a project similar to those we have developed before, projects that enhance the community like Essex Place, Hidden Creek, Heron Pond, Concord Creek, and the Concord Creek lots on the former Restero site. Each of them faced neighborhood opposition because change is a difficult thing, and each of them provided residents with a new quality of life, enhanced public access, and environmental stewardship. Many of them were substantially more dense than this project. On the Frick property, we immediately hired the necessary consultants and engineer to uncover the facts about the site. We delineated the wetlands and obtained DNR concurrence. We hired a consultant to delineate the woodland and other attributes of the environmental corridor, expanding what was previously considered environmental corridor. We got the written support and consent of SewerPAC. We developed and then modified our yield plan from 19 lots to 15 lots and to 13 lots, ultimately getting concept plan approval from city staff and planning commission. Along with North Shore Engineering of Mequon, we have studied drainage patterns in the area to make certain that we will have no adverse impact on the neighborhood. We have researched all of the neighbors' allegations against the project, both individually based on our combined development experience, along with the appropriate engineering professionals and staff. The first exhibit, or the first handout that we have, is the zoning map. Paul, if you can put it up on the screen. In the handouts, there's a zoning map that identifies in the city of Mequon all of the C2 zoning. And it looks like this. Again, can we show that to the audience, or I think everybody, the council has the 8.5 by 11. All right, Paul, be a mobile easel. Oh, Jack has it on the screen as well. Thank you. Based on this zoning map, we believe that this parcel should continue to have its R3 zoning. In 1997, the Frick property was not the only infill property in this neighborhood or sub-basin. However, none of these other parcels were given conservation zoning, even though they contain the same environmental attributes as the Frick property. Looking at the zoning map, you will see all of the C2 zoning in the sewer service area shown in yellow. This map was prepared by city staff from the city zoning map. Only 2 parcels have C2 base zoning, the Frick parcel and the city and school district owned Garvey Woods parcel located south of Wilson School. The Frick parcel has been uniquely singled out as a development parcel, although it is no different than several other infill sites in this drainage basin that have developed in the past 20 years without being held to a 5-acre density or the C2 conditional use restrictions. Many of them were developed with environmental sensitivity, stewardship, and density consistent with the surrounding properties, which is not being allowed to the Frick property. Only the environmental features of other infill parcels are protected by C2 as it was designed to be. Their underlying base zoning is consistent with the zoning density of their adjacent neighbors. The Frick parcel should be zoned in the same way, consistent with the surrounding R3 properties.
The second exhibit that we gave today is a map from Sewer Pack that was given to us by Chris Jors and several of the people at Sewer Pack who were available to do the walkthrough and the review of the property in 1997. It existed in this same format in 1997, showing that the Frick parcel is being served by sewer, and it is also developable within the area that was rezoned to C2. On the exhibit that you see, and Paul is pointing to, the Frick parcel is in red. The area that's in question was shown in yellow, which is developable sewered area, and the cross-hatched areas around the perimeter are the areas that were identified as environmentally significant. The map is labeled environmentally significant lands and planned sanitary sewer service area for the city of Mequon and the village of Thiensville. It shows that there are environmentally significant lands around the Frick property upland, but that it does not make it an undevelopable peninsula. Again, this map supports the R3 zoning of the Frick parcel. Paul and I are concerned about flooding in the neighborhood, and we wish we could do something about it. We submitted several pictures, which are in your packet this evening, and we took a look at some of the pictures that were submitted by the neighbors. I think the pictures were in a separate packet, and Paul, you have a set of pictures. You could show the pictures that we're addressing. Floodwaters in Mequon do not originate from this site. Floodwaters in Mequon do not submerge this site. Floodwaters in Mequon do not flow over this site. And floodwaters from Mequon, with the exception of an area contributed by 38.7 acres, do not flow through this site. We appreciate the photos that were submitted to the council by the neighbors. The photos show floodwater in the floodplain as expected, but based on familiar landmarks, they do not show flooding at the base flood elevation of 662.6. Most importantly, they do not show any flooding on the Frick property. If you look at the photos, which appear to have been taken from 2028 and 2042 West Ranch Road, looking north, you will see exposed islands that have elevations on the city and county topography map that are well below 662.6, as shown on the concept plan map with contour that is also in the handout today and Jack has on the screen right now. Additionally, in today's packet, we've given you a photo of the northeast corner of the Frick site. This is the property corner located at elevation 657, which is 5.6 feet below the flood elevation. That picture should look like this. It is in an area of healthy trees and healthy undergrowth, and there is no evidence of annual flood waters above this corner. The Frick property is not wet. Additionally, we've given you pictures taken this week of the two approximately 12-inch by 15-inch elliptical culverts under the bike path. That's the picture here, where if you look hard up in the upper left is the asphalt bike path, and in the center of the picture are the 12 by 15 elliptical culverts. This is the only place that water from outside of the Frick property, from the neighborhood, flows through the Frick property. This is also a very familiar landmark. This photo shows vegetation that is not disturbed by rapid water flow, and there is no evidence of channeling, scouring, or erosion due to frequent and rapid water flow. The invert elevation, or bottom of these culverts, is 659, again per the site topography, which is 3.6 feet below the 100-year flood elevation, and again, there is no evidence of regular flooding at this elevation. Again, we're sensitive to and understand that there is local flooding in this area, but it is not caused by the Frick property, nor can it be remedied by the Frick property. We also gave you a photo this week, this one, of the approximately 20-inch by 28-inch elliptical culvert that flows under the Gardner driveway. It's partially blocked with debris.
This culvert is the culvert that carries the water which drains through the Frick property, plus additional water from a culvert under the bike path from the south side of Ranch Road, which also carries water off of the adjacent properties. In the city file from 1997, when the property was presented, are two aerial photographs showing flooding that were apparently submitted by the neighbors. Again, we can reference familiar monuments in the neighborhood in these pictures, specifically the home or the road outside of the home at 2042 West Wildwood Drive, where the road elevation, per the topography, per the map, again, that Jack has on the board, is at or near elevation 659.1 per the county survey. That is 3.5 feet below the 100-year flood elevation. Although water does pool in the floodplain, there's no evidence that the water reaches the 100-year flood elevation on an annual basis. This does not diminish people's concerns and the effects of localized flooding on their property. None of the debris, ground vegetation, or trees exhibit signs of frequent flooding. All of the dead trees that are referenced in the other pictures that were presented are seen on the adjacent site at an elevation well below the flood elevation of 662.6. Walking the Frick site, as several of you have done, verifies all of this information. The next exhibit is the FEMA map that shows the flood elevation on all of our documents is 662.6. It is labeled as such in several places. It is the FEMA elevation that we were given by the city, not something that we chose randomly. Our documents show that the base flood elevation was determined by a survey crew on the ground, not on a flyover image or photoshopping. This exhibit shows without enhancement, color shading, highlighting, without enhancement, color shading, highlighting, or whiteout, FEMA's representation of the 100-year floodplain. In this drawing, or in this photograph, it sure looks like the Frick property deserves the same zoning consideration as any other site in the area. We are not proposing small islands of development as those shown in the upper right or the upper center portion of the project, where homes were developed within the floodplain and some fill or amendment was created in order to accommodate those homes. All of our lots are entirely above the flood elevation. All of our lots are completely free of land below the 100-year flood elevation. All of the land below the 100-year flood elevation is under subdivision stewardship and is not within the developable sites. Our homes are expected to have top of block elevations between 7 and 9 feet above the flood elevation of 662.6. This will allow us to minimize the need to truck on or off excavated material. Based on this map, the Frick parcel should be zoned R3 like all of its neighbors. The next document that we've included, which I believe Jack has as well, was prepared based on all of the city mapping and again the elevations of the floodway. This document shows the extent and the complexity of the floodplain in this section of the drainage basin. The red lines on the maps indicate the high points between drainage basins or drainage sub-basins that later become the channelized flows that we're all aware of. Again, this document shows that the Frick property is in fact mostly outside of the floodplain or the wet zones that are addressed by neighbors. It shows that there is a limited area of floodplain going through the Frick site, and that the balance of the property should be zoned R3 consistently with its neighbors. There's a significant difference between water going through the Frick site and water going around the Frick site. Contrary to the neighbors' retouched photos, which would lead the observer to believe Contrary to the neighbor's retouched Photoshop exhibit, which would lead the observer to believe that a great deal of water runs through the Frick site, nearly all of the water runs around the Frick site, never even coming into contact with the Frick property. Paul, could you?
North Shore.
At this point, I'd like to read into the public record a letter that, or memo we received from North Shore Engineering, 4 o'clock this afternoon. We had them take a look at the package that you, as council members, received on Thursday or Friday last week. We did get a copy of that. It was prepared by Howard Schley. And we had our engineers take a look at that to see if they would comment on some of the statements and maps in that package. And from North Shore Engineering, they wrote, Mequon Common Council. At the request of Paul Apfelbach and Fred Birch, North Shore Engineering completed a limited review of a 26-page document prepared by Howard Schley. The Schley document presents reasons to oppose rezoning of the Frick parcel. The following are points to consider regarding some of the statements found in the report. Number 1, approximately 39 acres of flow from the south runs along the east side of North Laguna Drive and then flows westerly through the southern boundary of the parcel. This flow is an area which will not be developed, thus the flow will remain unaffected. The remainder of the drainage basin, which is approximately 1,500 acres, flows adjacent to but southerly and easterly of the Frick parcel, not through the parcel as stated in the report. Number 2, the wet detention ponds used in this development serve a dual purpose. They provide storage capacity for larger storms while settling out particulates and sediments. These ponds will be placed inside the actual developed area and hence would not impede the natural movement of existing water throughout the basin. Number 3, as with all developments in the city of Mequon, a detailed stormwater management plan will be required which addresses City of Mequon ordinances, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources runoff management and discharge ordinances, and MMSD and Chapter 13 stormwater rules. The application of these ordinance requirements typically results in quantities of stormwater leaving the post-developed site at less than the overall rate of runoff before development. Thus, this development would not add any stormwater to the basin. Number 4, the lots in this conceptual design were laid out taking into account delineated wetlands, primary environmental corridor, and the 100-year floodplain. The buildable areas were created based on the following information. FEMA flood elevations, which were accurately located by survey methods, not shown based on aerial images, or, maps. Wetland delineation concurred by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. The flagging was located by survey methods. Field location by the use of survey methods of the sewer pack primary environmental corridor. Marking of the environmental corridor line was done by others. We present that half of this letter right now to try to help you better understand the package you received from Howard Schley.
The exhibit compiled by the City of Mequon for this portion of the city shows what happens at this location. I think you all have 11 by 17 copies of what Paul's holding up. There are 4 distinct subbasins which flow to the Milwaukee River Lagoon north of Ranch Road. Only one of these flows crosses the Frick property. The first flow is to the west, flowing from 841 acres down St. James Lane. The Frick property has nothing to do with this flow. The second flow comes from 38.9 acres along Laguna that crosses the property under the bike path, as we discussed when we talked about the pictures as addressed by, and also addressed by North Shore Engineering. Once again, the development of the Frick property will not change this flow. We are not crossing it, we are not channeling it, we are not changing it in any way. The third flow comes from an area of 78.2 acres along Oriole Lane. Flowing north, it turns the corner and goes to the west along the south side of Ranch Road for about 200 feet before flowing through 2 City of Mequon culverts under Ranch Road, and then flowing through a ditch between 2028 West Ranch Road and the city lift station to the Riverbend PUD pond. Perhaps 30 feet of the Ranch Road ditch borders the Frick parcel. The fourth and final flow comes from 1,392.6 acres to the east. It all passes under Country Lane. Some of this area is east of I-43, and some of it is south of Mequon Road. None of this flow ever comes in contact with the Frick parcel. None of this flow comes in contact with the Frick parcel. What is not addressed in this exhibit is the Riverbend and Wildwood Drive areas that flow directly into the floodplain or are in the floodplain, which never come again in contact with the Frick parcel. The diagonal line that runs through that, through that exhibit, which is also shown on the floodplain, the blue floodplain exhibit, the diagonal red line that runs across the Frick parcel is the high point between 2 subbasins. From this high point on the Frick parcel, the Frick property drains without a distinct channelized flow to the northeast into the flood basin. It also drains directly to the west along the Gardner property, except where it is impeded by the elevation of their driveway. And then it also drains to the south into the floodplain on the Frick property. These drainage patterns will not change after development, regardless of the stormwater management plan. We are very concerned about flooding. That is why we are deeply committed to controlling the stormwater discharge from this site. We will follow and exceed all applicable requirements and guidelines from the City of Mequon ordinances, the DNR, MMSD, and Sewer PAC. We are concerned about the environment, and that is why 52% of the 21 acres is outside of the private lots and will be under subdivision stewardship. We have carefully delineated and identified the wetlands on the Frick parcel.
The second half of the letter we received from North Shore Engineering addressed more of the wetlands and what they are, and responded to some claims in the package you received from Howard Schley. Reading as follows. Following our comments regarding some of the statements made in the submitted report concerning wetlands. Number 1, the Wisconsin DNR website does contain a site showing wetlands and potential wetlands. The 3 required indicators for wetlands are hydric soils, specific wetland vegetation, and hydrologic conditions, or water. The gold lines on the DNR map are typically areas which have already been delineated and determined to be wetlands. The areas in magenta, again, this is referring to colors on a document that came in your package from Howard Schley, contain wetland indicator soils, but are not classified as wetlands until all 3 required indicators are shown to exist. Therefore, the wetlands on the Frick property is located by North Shore Engineering and concurred on by Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources should be considered accurate. Number 2, again reflecting some claims in the package you received last week, wetlands do not expand during heavy rain events. The boundaries of wetlands are as described above, and that does not change during a rain event. A wetland boundary may change, either shrink or grow, over an extended period of time, but this is only when the three indicators as stated above show it to be the case. And then number 3, wetlands are not waterways or drainage ways. Of course, they are often located adjacent to ponds, rivers, swamps, etc., but typically they are a low area where the soil remains saturated and the other indicators are present. As is seen on the Frick parcel, and it occurs very often, wetlands are well out of the 100-year floodplain. So referring to this letter, it reflects upon our documents that are prepared, and we haven't modified them at all with information that has come from all of these professional sources.
Our concept plan does not require any modifications, filling, or changes to the wetland assets on this site, period. We can only manage the water that falls on this site. We cannot manage water that falls elsewhere in the community and does not come in contact with the site. We will do nothing to push water off of this site and onto other sites. We will do nothing that will divert water that runs through this site. This site cannot manufacture additional water and introduce it to the subbasin. The aldermen have been told that over time the floodplain north of 2028 and 2042 West Ranch Road has become a marsh. We agree with that observation, although it has nothing to do with the Frick property. In the past 20 years, erosion control standards have been established and are now enforced by the state, county, city, and MMSD to make certain that sedimentation does not continue. Construction practices have changed to reduce the flow of sediments off of the construction site. We are required to follow those practices. 13 lots on 21 acres is virtually the same density as the surrounding neighborhood. 13 lots is adequate to support a $235,000 initial investment by this development team to bring city water to the edge of this site. That is over $18,000 per lot of public improvements by the private developer for an off-site water main extension and fire hydrants, meaning that combined with on-site water cost, each homeowner will invest nearly 3 times the cost of a well in providing an enhanced fire protection to their neighbors while making certain that there is no change in the groundwater aquifer. On the table, there are soil samples of the property that we took from the site this week. We wish they could absorb 10 times their weight in water, but they are Mequon clay. The soil cannot provide any benefit to the community, even if it was in contact with the drainage paths through and around this drainage basin. The soil does not absorb. At Planning Commission and in discussion with city residents in the subsequent weeks, I was asked to demonstrate the differences in elevation between the Frick parcel, the floodplain, and future home sites. We were specifically asked if we would be putting new homeowners in peril, like some of the small islands that were created in earlier developments. We were asked to reference the elevation of the Frick site to familiar landmarks in the neighborhood. There's a significant amount more topography in this area, and yet this site does not tower over any other. The Frick property is not unique in its position, but as you see on the FEMA map exhibit and through this demonstration, the upland on this property is high and dry.
You about finished, Fred? You about finished? Can you wrap this up? Please.
We begin with the ordinary water level of the River Bend Pond. The ordinary water surface elevation per the county topography is 654.8, with the rim around the pond shown at approximately 650 feet. We will use the floor of the council chamber. We'll use the floor of the council chamber to reference that elevation. Mr. Frick was told that when it rains, you can float a canoe on Ranch Road at the west end of the site. Ranch Road at the southwest corner of the site is at elevation 657.8, 3 feet above that pond. I need one more large, please. We observed the water level across the floodplain on Wildwood Road in one of the photographs. The elevation in front of 2042 West Wildwood is 659.1 feet, or 4.3 feet above the pond. The floodplain elevation, the base flood elevation, is 662.6, or 7.8 feet above the pond. The temporary cul-de-sac bulb on Ranch Road, where you enter the Frick site, is 667.1 feet, 4.5 feet above the flood elevation, and 12.3 feet above the pond. As our road rises up the site to the northwest, the existing grade at the end of the cul-de-sac, per North Shore Engineering verification and the county topography map, is 671.6, 9 feet above flood elevation, or 16.8 feet above the pond. Our anticipated yard grades in front of our homes will be between 670 feet and 671 feet, in line with the existing topography. Based on those yard grades, a typical 8-foot basement on this site will be at 663.33 to 664.33, which is above the 100-year flood elevation. None of our new homeowners will be in peril. Paul and I have been told by several well-meaning neighbors that we should threaten to eliminate the walk path and bike path if the Fricks do not get their zoning restored. I'm not willing to suggest that. We are committed to the neighborhood regardless of the outcome of this meeting, and I'm committed to looking forward to ways to enhance the community. That includes interconnection between roads and neighborhoods. This is a busy biking and walking corridor that deserves consideration. Last evening, when I was on the Frick site just before dusk, I was approached by a man who lives on St. James Lane. He inquired about purchasing a simple lot for an affordable
Fred,
home.
please, get 1 minute, wrap this up, please.
We're less than a minute. He mentioned his concerns about flooding in the area, but after a brief description, he told me that last week he walked the entire 21 acres and that he had already told his wife that he believed that the flyers were wrong. He believes that this could be a desirable place to live. He originally moved to the neighborhood so his children could walk to school. Now they have moved on. His efforts to purchase a buildable lot elsewhere in the city have been unsuccessful, and he likes this neighborhood. On a side note, he told me, as a resident on St. James Lane, that he believes that the city has tried hard to improve drainage in this area. He talked about new concrete culverts, ditching, and efforts after major storm events to come and remove debris. Often these efforts are noticed, but not lauded. That is unfortunate.
I hope that one day 13 more families can walk in this community, because from this site, you can easily walk to Mequon Road and Port Washington Road. You can walk to Starbucks, Metro Market, Walgreens, McDonald's, and yes, even Taco Bell. The past is behind us, but we believe that the future of Mequon should include a 13-lot R3 development on the Frick site. We hope that you choose to support restoring the R3 zoning to the Frick property so that 125 years from now, our great-grandchildren can celebrate the anniversary of this great infill project. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to take this now to the Common Council. Questions, comments, motions, concerns. Alderman Bushy.
A question regarding...
Use the microphone, please.
Oh, thank you. I have a question regarding the stormwater ponds and the do no harm philosophy and how city engineering is to how those operate and ensure that that for the annual rains, the thaw, how the ponds address those issues.
Stormwater facilities have two functions, water quality and water quantity. So the quality is to make sure that the discharge that leaves the site doesn't carry sediment, pollutants, and other restrictions. The water quantity restriction is with respect to the rate at which the water leaves the site. The city's requirement is that the rate at which the water would leave the site has to be less than or equal to that of the conditions before then. So the water that leaves this site would have to be less than or equal to what it is right now, since it is undeveloped. There will, as the neighbors note, be more water. It hits the roofs, the roads, the driveways. That will increase the volume of runoff. But the quantity is controlled by requiring that it would be retained on the development site until it is released at the rate that are the same or equal to what that is pre-development. Now, of course, as cited, there are storm events that will always exceed the design parameters. There is existing drainage issues that are cited downstream that will not be helped by this project, but again, the rate of the runoff will be the same or equal to. So they will get the same amount of runoff over a longer period of time. In order to ensure that those are not only designed, but implemented, constructed, and maintained and operated over the years, the city requires two forms of guarantees. One is a stormwater maintenance and easement agreement, whereby initially the developer and subsequently the homeowners association would be required to maintain those stormwater facilities over time. And in order to be sure that that transition between the initial construction and the ultimate operations and maintenance are fulfilled and do not impact downstream developments, they're required to post a drainage financial guarantee.
Thank you. And can I ask another question to the developers? Can you further elaborate on the discussion between the city water versus well water decision?
I think Kristen can comment on the process, but in the event that there's a land division and you go before the water board and you request either a waiver or you agree to extend water. In this case, we went early to meet with the city water representative, Jim Voigt, who prepared a proposal that indicated that extending water from this location to the existing water system would come at a cost of approximately $234,000, and he believed that at somewhere near 13 lots that they would recommend that the project uses city water. But he believed that at a lower number, and certainly as low as 6, that the city would support a waiver which would allow wells to be used on the property. So, Kristen.
Yes, ultimately it's a Water Utility Commission decision. If the developer sought to develop this property on private wells, it would have to appear before the Water Utility Commission and request a deferral.
And at 4, it would not be required, correct?
No. It's the Water Utility Commission's option to require private or public water extension at any density.
Alderman Nervin.
Could staff or the developer comment on the function of the stormwater ponds when they're so close to the edge of the boundary where you are encroaching, or coming close to encroaching on the 100-year floodplain? It seems like those will have to be dug into the ground. I would assume if you dug a hole there now, you'd probably hit water pretty soon. It would be full most of the time. How is it going to accept more runoff?
Typically for Mequon soils, we don't anticipate that there's any infiltration. So we typically always assume that the ponds or the stormwater facilities would retain water and not drain water.
Well, I think if you dug a hole, you'd likely hit water.
Oh, I see. They'd be required as a part of that to provide the data to support that a pond, assuming that's what they ultimately use as their stormwater facilities, would not have water prior to the runoff, or that it would otherwise accommodate for it if it does.
At Heron Pond, for example, one of the ponds would have filled with water had it not been re-engineered and rebuilt with a clay liner. And then it's tested so that the water doesn't infiltrate that pond. If you hit a gravel seam or cobblestones, for example, that are next to a riverbed or a creek, you can run into that problem. But clay itself is then, all through lots of inspections and everything, is put in and layered and lines the pond.
Alderman Meyer.
And looking at the map, I'm a little concerned from the comment of the applicant and then the map, how that, and the comment from the applicant was that there's no water on the property, the developable property, but on the map it shows wetlands, so which is it?
There are wetlands within the upland area you're referring to?
Yeah.
Yes, if you can look on the map, basically there's 2 fingers of wetlands. One is coming right through here, and then there's a finger going up in this area as well. And then there's another finger that feeds a little bit off of this, that drains into this wetland.
And that's coming from the 100-year floodplain?
No.
That one finger over here?
None of those are within the 100-year floodplain. Those are above the 100.
No, I didn't say within, but I mean the one over there, is that one attached to that?
No, what happens on those is there are two of the wetlands actually are sloped and drain into the 100-year floodplain. The one is behind, that you were noting, between lots 6 and 7. It's both in the upland area, and it exists because the 100-year floodplain there is, there's no standing water. That one has a slight slope. If you look at the grades, has a slight slope and drains to the 100-year floodplain. And then the other one between lots 11 and 12, again, they don't normally hold water, but they drain. That one also drains down to the east. If you look at the wetland between lots 5 and 13, that one is perched. And if you look at the wetland up between 9, or effectively between 9 and 10, again, that one is perched. But those other 2 wetlands do have some slope and have an element of, that would be called, I guess, a swale in them. Is that accurate, Kristen? I mean, is that?
No, is it wetland or isn't it wetland in that area?
It is a wetland.
Wetland, correct.
It's wetland, but there's not necessarily standing water or even visible water in many of the wetlands. It's definitely wetter than the ground surrounding it, but it's I was there with the DNR expert when he actually took his auger and dug in multiple soil samples to confirm that the areas that we had marked were wetlands, and he was very interested in making sure that the wetlands were limited to that area. But it's not water and cattails like you might think. you can be well above the flood elevation and still have a wetland. And most of these wetlands don't have cattails, for example.
Okay. Alderman Nervin?
I see in the plan you tout that most of the wetlands or critical environmental is not on anyone's lot, but how about, could you comment on the portions of the wetlands that are on people's lots? How do you, those won't be conveyed to the overview of the subdivision, they'll be responsibility of private property owners, and how do you ensure they don't fill or otherwise disturb those? It seems like a hard thing to do over time. There'll be a temptation to rip it up, put in lawn, and which was exactly one of the.
That's not an unusual situation on many lots in the city where ones that were divided recently or parts of new subdivisions that have wetlands that are then delineated and identified, and no building permit will be ever issued that would allow that, and there will be, I mean, it's I believe part of a deed restriction on the property not to be able to build in the wetland. So they will be under individual ownership as they are in many other, many other areas of the city, but they will be restricted from no land disturbing activities or anything else, no filling, no excavating, things like that.
The other option would be just to have them shrink the lot so they're not within any wetland boundary. I mean, that is possible. We've done that in other developments. I believe the Enclave and the Highlander Estate subdivision, we required all the wetlands to be off private property. We could do that here. There was a little concern, I think, from the developer's aspect that if we did shrink the lots, they'd be getting a little too small in terms of what we typically see in a conservation. They weren't sure if the council would support smaller lots, but those lots could be reduced in size so that the wetlands are not on anybody's individual private property, but within an outlot.
I think it's easier to regulate what happens to them if they're not under individual property owners. I mean, because I know they have all the restrictions and they can't do it, but that only applies to the people who follow the rules and don't just fill it in themselves, which will be the temptation.
From an enforcement standpoint, I'll just tell you that it doesn't really matter, because what happens is that folks that own lots don't necessarily realize that that's an outlet, or even if it is an outlet, they figure, I can fill that in. It makes it look better, and it becomes an enforcement issue that we have to deal with. Do it here, we do it in all the other communities we deal with. It's just a fact of life.
Alderman Strelchak.
I want to address what many of the residents have said. I mean, we had 40-plus people opposed. I lost track of count as I was thinking about what some of the individuals were saying, and the mayor was reading off additional names, of which every single person spoke of water concerns and water flow. So I'm glad that we're addressing this fully. However, their property is not on this property. Their property has water that flows through it, it flows off of it. Highlight for me, if you could, we've got differing reports of where the water goes. The developer saying that the water hits the fringe, doesn't really flow through the property. We've got residents that say that they do. I'd like city staff to please comment on that so we can make an evaluated decision on that particular thing. This isn't a case of not in my backyard. You all talked about water issues. This needs to be very thorough.
Well, again, what we show in terms of the drainage is based on the topos that we have. We have 3 different sets of topos in the city dating back to the 90s. We have a 2010 topo and a 2015 topo. And based on the topography, our engineering department did work on basically what we have in front of you here is basically the subbasins and how they drain. And again, based on that information, you can see there's a dark, and it's kind of hard to see, but there's a dark line here that shows this entire basin that feeds, and I think none of the neighbors talked about this area, that feeds up through this area here. Then there's a large basin that goes across Port Washington Road again, which a lot of the neighbors were speaking of. That drains up through this area here, and then this gets a little complicated because some of it can go this way and some of it can go this way depending on how much water's in the culverts and localized rain and things like that. But I think that the issue that I think we can state clearly is that a lot of this area is upland. It's higher. It's higher than the surrounding area, and that's what the we looked at that as part of this map, and we tried to determine what was the elevation of the area, and this area is shown to be much higher, and obviously water seeks its own level or flows downhill. So we don't see, again, with the evidence we have, we don't see any evidence that it flows actually through the main portion of the property.
Would this development in any way impede the water from leaving these residents' property in an effective manner?
Again, not based on the evidence we're seeing. Again, on this property, and we look at the actual site plan, a lot of the water flows right through here and goes around through here. And then the other goes this way and then flows around this way. So that water will still, this is all part of the environmental corridor, it's part of the wetlands, part of the floodplain. You know, sewer pack, if there's a water extension, they will have conditions that they'll place in the primary corridor, which will basically say that you're not allowed to do any land disturbing activity within that corridor. No grading, nothing. That has to be left in a natural state. So all that current situation will still remain as is, as well as this area over here, because this is also part of the primary corridor, this hatched area down in here.
But didn't you say that one went kind of through from the one to the other?
There's, I believe, and Kristen can correct me if I'm wrong, there's a culvert that crosses Ranch that comes this way, and it's, I think, right on the border of the Frick property, but it's not within the upland area. So there is a cul-de-sac right now that's existing that would basically extend the road off of to the northwest. That would not have any impact on the current situation that's out there. The culvert's already there. Do you want to add anything?
Garrell. Well, I wanted to thank the residents for coming, and I wanted to thank the developer for entertaining show. I got to packet on Thursday night and read it and looked at it and saw the letters and read the letters and was really concerned about the flooding. And looked at it again and thought, you know, typically I gotta know. And oddly enough, then one of the developers called me and said, hey, usually I never get calls from developers. He said, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this proposal. And I said, I got a bunch of letters over here. I got to see this property. So we went out on a Saturday. And I was looking for my big boots, and I couldn't find them, and I had a pair of sandals on, just open-toed sandals, and I grabbed it, and I jumped in the car, and I went over there, got there a few minutes late, and walked the entire area for an hour and a half, walked the entire area up and down, and all the things that the developer said, he said tonight. The higher areas over there are dry with big trees on them, the old growth oaks and hickory, and it's really, you know, that they don't flood. There's no soil, there's no on those roots of those trees. They're buried. In wet areas, those roots will show. It's much higher than the surrounding area, and you could tell we would walk down to the floodplain, and then we would come up, and he said, where's the floodplain? And it looked to me like it was about 4 feet in front of me because there was a ridge. I said, no, it's up here. We walked another 300 feet up. And it was high and dry. That whole area was high and dry. I don't, you know, you see what happens in your areas when it rains and how that flooding comes through there, and I understand that my property had a lot of problems in the past, and I had to dig it out and spend thousands and thousands of dollars fixing it. That water that comes off of this parcel can't change the flow. It's higher, it's drier, and it flows downward. I don't see how it can add to your drainage problems where you're at. I thought the presentation, I watched the presentation. I walked the property. I noticed that a lot of the areas are being used by some of the neighbors. One area was all, you know, all mowed nicely. in there. To me, it's a buildable area. I also looked at where the lots are going to be built, and the concern with that. You know, typically when a group comes like this before the Common Council, on all my votes, I've looked at both sides, and up until tonight, I've always voted with the residents. And when you don't vote with the residents, you want to explain to them why. You have to understand why. I don't believe in my heart and with the studies and everything else that if they build here and if they build 13 lots, that it's going to negatively affect any of you on your watershed. I truly believe that.
Back in the spring or in June. Not in September, not in August.
No, please, please. Alderman Hawkins?
First of all, let me say congratulations and thank you to everybody for coming tonight. I'm very, very impressed with all the material that has been sent to us either through the mail, through email. People have taken a lot of time taking photographs, and this parcel obviously has quite a bit of history to it, going back at least, well, we've talked about 20 years. What's relevant for the discussion tonight is the decision 20 years ago to change the zoning of the Frick property to C2. So it's been said that that wasn't fair at the time. It was certainly over the objection of the Frick family. And we have the opportunity to keep it at C2, and if that happens, there will be probably 5, 6 homes that will be built on the property, possibly 7, by doing nothing to change the zoning. So what was proposed, by the way, in 97, 20 years ago, were 22 homes, I believe, and that prompted the discussion back then. But we're asked to, rather than approve 6 homes by maintaining the C2 zoning, we're asked to approve 13 homes. And as the discussion has gone all night, it's just been reinforced. Well, I won't say reinforcing. Let me say that I'm more convinced by the argument that staff has made, that DNR has made, that SewerPAC has made, and that the developers have made, that there's not going to be damage done if we allow 13 homes here. As a matter, and the developers have spoken. And I believe sincerely that they want to protect this land, protect the neighbors to the extent that they can, but certainly protect the Frick property and whoever buys the 13 homes there. And I believe they're sincere when they say they don't want to harm the area, but help it. And in fact, when it got to the issues of water and sewer, by allowing 13 homes here, those 13 homeowners won't have to dig wells. They will be served by city water, which I think is a very, very positive thing. In addition to that, the sewer, city sewer would be extended, which I think is a benefit environmentally to everyone concerned. So again, I would say I've got the utmost respect for everybody who spoke tonight, everybody who put together literature, who took photographs. I think you did a terrific job, and obviously there's a lot of passion here. But I did hear, and I believe the developers are sincere in that whatever happens with the ultimate if they do get the permission to go from 6 to 13 homes, that they will do whatever it is they can to preserve and protect the surrounding areas. So people ask me, why do you ever want to be an alderman? 'Cause you stay to 12 o'clock some nights and you hear arguments from a lot of people who are very passionate, and somebody always is going to go home disappointed. But I have to vote, as Alderman Garrell says, with what the facts are in front of us and what you believe are the facts that weigh. In this case, I think the facts weigh in favor of the developers and the Frick family.
What are you going to do if you're wrong?
Excuse me.
Please gavel that.
Alderman Schneider?
Could I just ask the developers, was there any consideration given to proceeding with development under the C2 restriction?
I would answer that by saying yes, but we don't believe that it's in keeping with the the surrounding community. The neighborhood is 1 acre lots. The neighborhood isn't 5 acre lots. We believe that I'm a strong advocate for the community. I'm a strong advocate for modest homes. And when the Fricks interviewed people to talk about development, there were some people who looked at these as being 3 or 4 estate lots, but we don't believe this is the place for 3 or 4 estate lots. We also believe that there's a benefit to bringing water, both for those residents and bringing fire water a significant distance, and that ultimately that connection is important. So,
Although it's not that you could not bring water to the so-called estate lots, that would still be a possibility. It in fact would require you to get a waiver if that doesn't happen. Isn't that correct?
yes, and even at 13 lots, the cost of water is roughly 3 times the cost of wells, which is, historically, I don't know what the threshold is for waiver.
It's not a financial threshold.
But from a reasonableness standpoint,
It would be expensive.
Bringing, nearly $300,000 worth of water for 6 new homes is not, and it's also bringing them along an area where it's unlikely that many people will connect, in the future to defray the cost of the extension. So, I believe we looked at it more from the sense of what fits within the community, and that's why we're looking at more than 6 lots. That's why we ended up where we are.
Alderman Durbin.
Was there any consideration for just going for R3 instead of the R3 with PUD overlay? Because I think the PUD is jacking up the density on the peninsula of land that actually may be buildable. I think if I rolled back the clock 20 years, and I was not here 20 years ago, I was just graduating college at that time. I think the thing that they probably should have done back in the day was the critical environmental corridor probably should have been zoned C1 and left the rest of it R3. So you could build 1 acre lots on this peninsula instead of 0.6, 0.7 acre lots. But I've seen a lot of these concept plans in 5 years, and this one's one of the more tortured ones to try and get the pieces to fall into place. And it's just it'd be nice if there was some sort of compromise between what you can build now and what you're wanting to build. This is just a little bit too far-reaching for me.
Sure. So there are two issues, I think. One is the lot count or zoning density, and the other is, I think it was addressed in the report that we created a 13-lot yield plan which would follow the R3 zoning, but it was really undesirable to build per that. This allows public access and combined stewardship, which was some of the assets. So would we build R3 without the PUD? We would look at that, or would we build a different R3 PUD? We haven't studied that. We're at this 13-lot plan because we think that this works.
I don't know how you pull off the walking path and comply with the requirement to not disturb the lands in the environmental corridor. It's going to be...
Well, I think under the R3.
But the walking path is well beyond the back of the lots.
Probably remove the walking path so they wouldn't have it going through individual properties throughout the system. So that's why we prefer the conservation design, so it does allow for that public open space.
I think my comment, though, is that the walking path is in what's designated the critical environmental corridor. Wasn't one of Sewer PAC's recommendations not to disturb the lands in those areas?
I did speak to
How
them.
do you accomplish a walking path without?
I did
turning
speak to
so-
them about that, and they were, for a public benefit like a walking path, they were supportive of the, I asked them about specifically the boardwalks and what types of paths they would allow in there, and they were supportive of having paths around the property for the benefit of the public.
Alderman Meyer?
First of all, the reason why you go from 6 to 13 is because of the fact of, for money and the fact of the matter for they're easier to sell. I mean, that's just the basis between it. It's not, no offense, it's not for sense of community, it's for those reasons. That's the reason why you do that. Now let me preface that with saying there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting a profit up on stuff. While yes, there's areas inside of it that can be built, and there's a lot of high areas inside there, and that's the reason why they went with the C2 zoning on it, so because there were areas that, at that time, they thought there could be buildable on those areas for it. And if some of the recollection is back, that there was, in past times, and I think it was in the Moriarty era, that they were concerned about some of these outlying lots inside of it. Not the higher ones in the middle, as much as they were concerned about these outlying areas inside of there, putting those homes in those areas. My concern is still kind of that at this point. Just because you can build it doesn't mean that it's appropriate to do it, and it's not putting some of these places in jeopardy at the time. I am a little concerned about, you know, some of the wetland fingers that come inside of it that are coming, the one is coming up to the floodplain. I mean, I don't think that staff can tell me and guarantee me 100% that this area wouldn't be flooded at some point during a heavy rainstorm, and they'd never guarantee that at all. I think with the fact of having all these wetlands that are inside, and even though you say that there's not cattails in them and things of that nature, there's still wetlands that are there for a reason. They have probably flooded at times. Otherwise, there wouldn't be wetlands inside of it. And I hate putting more properties at risk, which previous common councils have and previous planning commissions have, by building in areas that, you know, you get areas that you start to build, and you build the ones that are least expensive for you to do and the ones that you can do real easily. And then you got properties that are kind of left over at the end to infill. These are one of those properties kind of left over at the end to kind of infill. And, you know, should it be done? You know, I don't think so. I think it should be main C2. I think there's a situation here where we're not denying the owner to develop at all. They have the opportunity to develop at the 6 or 7 or whatever it is. They have that opportunity. It's just saying that I don't think it should be at the 13. I think it should be staying at the C2 zoning for it. So that's what I have to say about it.
Chad, can you put this photo back up?
Is that the elevation, the 6, the zoning one? Okay, sure.
I need to zoom.
And basically, I created this map. This basically shows roughly the sewer boundary, Wauwatosa to Highland. And what we did was we wanted to see, because there was a comment back when the rezoning was done in '97, that Sewer PAC's recommendation that we did not single out this property. We looked at it from a citywide issue to rezone other properties as well. So we actually went through this process to see if any other properties were zone C2 that were not part of the wetlands or floodplain. So what we see here is the blue area is the floodplain, and the green area is the wetlands, and those overlay all any other C2 areas. So what we ended up with was the two yellow areas, the Frick property and the Garvey Woods. Those were the only areas that we could determine from the GIS that were basically areas of upland that have C2 zoning.
Mr. President, can you take the gavel? I just want to make a comment.
I don't have one to take, but I'll do it.
I got a couple of them over here. I voted against this at the Planning Commission, And I was on the Common Council that voted unanimously to zone this C2 20 years ago. And the reason I did that was because this parcel appeared to me to be environmentally sensitive. And I know environmentally sensitive is not a zoning category, it's not a legal term, it's not an engineering term. But if you look at this land, and this is a great photo of it, looks more like a Caribbean island than it does developable land. And you consider the ecology and the geography of where this is located, and the impacts that might happen on this piece of property, I would say it's environmentally sensitive, and I still do. And I think it's developable under the C2, and I think that it should remain C2. And I don't think you should more than double the density of development on a property such as this. I can imagine the day when that little yellow connection to the road gets cut off, and rivers have a tendency to do that, floodplains have a tendency to do that. So I think this property should remain zoned as it is and be developed in that fashion. And all the good things that Fred and Paul talk about can still be done on a property with 6 lots as opposed to 13 lots.
You want this
That's
back now?
that's my comment, Mr. President. Thank you. Does anybody have a motion?
Paul? We're being asked to rezone from C2 to R3, so I would make that motion.
You're making a motion to approve
Rezone the property,
ordinance 1495.
1495 from C2 to R3.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any further discussion? Alderman Bushy.
Thank you. Since the Planning Commission had a meeting 1 month ago that I attended, I viewed my job here to sift through all of the information that was sent by mail, email, and discussions. So I reached out and met with both Bonnie Lake Real Estate and Mr. Schley and other individuals from the opposition to the development here. They both have been no shortage of information, and they've been very eager to share, and it's been very illuminating. I've read, again, this very heartfelt mail that came, not just emails, but the mail with pictures, and I found there's some common threads that have come out in these discussions. Many things I have not been aware of after living in the area for 12 years. And that is, first of all, developments along Port Washington Road, Mequon roads, they've been increasing the flooding from when storms happen into this area, and even discussions about upstream from Grafton are coming in. So that's one point that people have mentioned. And again, the flooding in the area, which we've heard. Another point that I heard again a number of times is concern over the well water and aquifers if wells are going to be implemented here. And there was also an increase, and we had this discussion about if wetlands or floodplains are filled in. And finally, or not finally, but another big one that was discussed was the 1996-97 floods were extremely destructive to the basements in the area. And there's been rain since then that we saw pictures of. It also concerns the loss of nature, wildlife, and trees. Also concerns over the owners, whether they're residents or developers' residents or not. So that's a summary of the information that I've received. I've also received information concerning very positive things about the Bonnie Lake developers, and so that's all put together. So with the one point that I think is going on here is that there are multiple issues, and one big issue that has been mentioned more and more is about the drainage that we've seen going into over Ranch Road, West Ranch Road, going through there, and then down also Oriole and Laguna. Those are our primary concerns. And I had discussions with the Director of Engineering, Public Works and Engineering, and it is on the docket, fortunately to predecessor sitting here, pushing and favoring, trying to address those issues of our clay soil, not allowing the water and the heavy rains to go through, and to increase the sewer or the stormwater capacity. And that's something that I will also continue to work with in order to push that issue, because hearing stories that I had not heard before of water running this way, that way, down the road, that's an issue that I think needs to be high up for the city to address. Concerning the rezoning, I also want to make sure that the context here is correct. In many discussions, the thought was, is it 13 or 0? And as Alderman Hawkins pointed out, the difference we're looking at is 6 in the C2 zoning versus a potential 13 in the proposal here. That's a 7-home difference in a district with approximately 1,031 homes, thanks Google Maps. When meeting with both parties, I did have wishful thinkings that there would be an opportunity to come to some sort of agreement here and see if there's a middle zone. That was evident through the meetings that that was not going to take place. And as we also noted, that prior to 97, there was the R4 3/4 acre zoning, and the developers asking essentially a method of going back to the pre-97 with the sewer pack discussion. Another primary concern in the comments was about affecting the nearby homes. And we've heard now from city engineering, all of the information from governing bodies, that, we do have the clay soil in the laguna, and there are the stormwater measures on this property. So all this information coming forth actually, for whatever development that ultimately happens in this area, is of great benefit to the decision as to whether there's basements, drain tilings, and how water routing takes place. Concerning the ordinances, there's the retention ponds, and then even noted in discussions that every 3 years the homeowners association is required to maintain certification of the retention ponds, and they're required to maintain proper drainage. And while wetlands and floodplains can't be filled in, I would ultimately recommend that those wetlands somehow get delineated and highlighted in any housing homeowners association. So trying to pull all these issues together, and there's numerous issues here. I also note that this land has been used for a long time, decades. I used the bike path going through there. I was not aware of the whole trail that was running through that area. So I know one of the objectives in the packet that I received was the ideal situation, hearing from the opposition to the development, is that 0 development would be ideal. So I'm left here thinking, a recent quote I read by Seal Leaf Babin, that there is no 100% right solution. The picture is never complete. But to cite this, we need to make a decision. My goal here is, as I see it, is to keep, especially in the district where the homes are of reasonable size, that they're affordable. I like the idea of making it more possible to extend city water, and obviously through the usage of this area, that the walkable path is desirable. I do have concern that if it remains a C2, that there's going to be objectives and ways to keep on working around and making sure that no development happens. And I don't think that that itself is a proper way of going around legal matters to make it happen. So as I see it, it's easy to take an easy path of just saying no to this. But I've thought through this, and I'd actually like to make an amendment based on much of the information here to the proposal, and that is specifically reduce the amount of homes there from a maximum of 13 to 10. Specifically removing from their diagram the house at the end of Laguna, plot number 1, which would, I think, is Not necessarily according to engineering designs, but it has a strong potential of causing a blockage when there are the flood runovers, especially in excessive times. So I think that it could be a very large impediment. And similarly, to the opposite side of that wetland is plot number 6 with the .53 acre lot, which I think also has that potential. And then I recommend leaving it up to the designers to merge perhaps properties 7, 8, and 9 into 2 properties so that we have a maximum of 10 here. And I know that this is an amendment that I'd like to make that is going to make nobody happy, but my objectives, as I see it, are to get onto the city water, make it manageable to do so without large issues, and to keep this as a place that is affordable for people to develop, and perhaps even use some of this area for a playground, or that would be up to the developers. But, so I'd like to make an amendment to reduce, continue with the proposal, but reduce it to a maximum of 10 homes, specifically removing homes 1 and 6 from the design.
I think that the appropriate language that you're looking for is that you would make a motion to amend such that the rezoning is conditioned upon a density of not more than 10 lots.
Can I yes, and can I specifically say no development at the end of Laguna?
You can add that too, yes.
Add it.
Second that.
There's a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion on that amendment?
Just recognizing maybe this is what Mr. Bursch is going to point out as well, that ultimately the site plan itself and subdivision plat will come forward, and some of those issues will be worked out in terms of where lots will be and those types of things. But at least in terms of the rezoning, putting that condition of density is important, but just recognize that this is a proposal. This isn't what ultimately may come forward.
But you want to be clear in the amendment that lots 1 and 6 are removed.
Correct.
And that
That's what I
any
said.
modification to the plan will not include those areas, correct?
And you said where 7, 8, and 9 were, you preferred to see
That's an idea.
2 lots instead of 3.
Yeah, that we can work out too.
That will be obviously up to the final design, but to limit it to a maximum then of 10 houses with the 1 and 6 being definitely removed from any future design.
Understood. Comments?
Mr. Birch has a comment.
Mr. Bursch?
We would, as the development team, we would support that suggestion. We agree with 1 and 6 being changed. When we look at redeveloping the back of the property, we'd be happy to meet with you or with, the neighbors to determine whether it's 7, 8, and 9, or whether it's 10, 11, whatever we'd want to look at. We understand the concern about how do we best protect wetlands and things like that, but we would support 1 and 6. And at 10 lots, we would not seek a water waiver. We would bring city water to the site. So that answers that question that might be otherwise up in the air.
Let's go for another line. No further discussion? This is a vote on the amendment. Call the roll.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins, Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nervin,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Good amendment.
Did he vote?
Did I vote?
What's the vote?
I voted first.
7-0?
first.
7-0, and the amendment passes. Back to the main motion. Any further discussion?
Main motion as
Well,
amended.
Do we need to,
The
do
main
we need
motion
to
has been
approve that
amended.
as a 6-vote majority, supermajority?
We had 7.
Yes.
I know
You
that.
had 7, but no, only the rezoning itself, the ultimate vote needs to be the 3/4 majority vote. So you could have passed that on a simple majority, the amendment.
Oh, all right.
The final vote still needs to be the 3/4 vote.
So now the main motion, call the roll.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins, Alderman Schneider,
No.
Alderman Nurbin,
No.
Alderman Stralcheck,
No.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
No.
Well, that's not very good.
3 ayes and 4 noes.
3 ayes and 4 noes. And the motion fails. And that's the end of that. I think we'll take a short 5-minute break, allow the room to clear out. Thank you again for all of you for coming.
Thank you.
Not sure they realize that happened.
So you come up with a cover.
They can build 2 houses. No more
Basis for decisions. There was no line.
Because you made bad business.
Nothing else.
I say they come back with R2.
I went out in that land. It was wet. It was wet.
I walked that property.
That was,
Okay, back to our agenda and
Okay, we got our
personal
meeting
appearances
Sorry, I hate to cut you short.
and public comments. Citizens wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda may do so at this time. Ms. Bouquet.
There are two of us.
Mr. Lang.
My
Hello.
co-chair of the Gateway Committee that the mayor appointed earlier this year is David Lang, who is village board trustee, and I have been chairing this committee. We want you to know we've been working, and the reason we're here tonight is to bring to your attention the need for your action soon. You'll be receiving a packet on Friday that will tell you more about what we've been doing. We have been focusing on pulling together an RFP to seek architectural designs of a gateway to the center of our combined communities. You all know I've been working on what we've been calling Town Center and Town Center District for a number of years. It's time that we had a gateway that draws attention to the fact that this is the center of our community. We're a little concerned that most people, when they talk about town center, essentially talk about the new construction that is right over here, that is predominantly commercial with some residential. Most people are talking about that as the town center, not the district, not the combination of Mequon Road and Cedarburg Road being a part of a designed neighborhood. But we have, in our committee, been talking about the fact that this was a township. You mentioned it earlier. It's a township. We changed it into a city. It was a township with an incorporated village. It's now a city with an incorporated village in the center. We want a gateway that says, we are a community together, and this is the center of it. And we want people to come here, work, play, buy goods, use our recreation that is available in both areas. But we are going to need municipal commitment from both the village board and the city council in order to not only get a design, but it's time we all got off the dime and got this gateway built. We'd like to see it built next year. So we don't know what it's going to cost yet because we don't have a design, but based on information that has been gathered over a number of years, we're thinking that it's going to be somewhere up around $500,000. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, depends on the design that comes through. We have people on the Gateway Committee who have said, that representing service organizations in town, that we are willing to raise funds in collaboration with the city and the village to build a gateway. But we are going to need a commitment from, a monetary commitment from both communities or both boards within our community in order to make this work. And David's here to represent the village and tell you that we spoke to them last night.
Yeah, good evening. I won't take a lot of time. Just wanted to let you know that we think we've got a lot of really nice things going on in Thiensville. The farmers market regularly drawing over 1,000 people. There's a lot of development going on. And we see a lot of excitement coming from the town center, and we'd like to see that continue. We'd like to work closely with Mequon in signage and other ways to make these two communities look more similar, and I think the Gateway project is a great way to start. 3 years ago, the board did allocate money for the Gateway whatever it ends up looking for the Gateway program. That money has been allocated, and we're just waiting for something to happen. Just so you know, the TIF will run out next year in Thiensville. So that TIF disappears after 2018, it's going to be a lot easier for us to be able to allocate that money for the Gateway program when the TIF is still in existence. So it's allocated, it's budgeted, it's there, but eventually, if it takes too long, I'm concerned about being able to come up with the money at that time. Thiensville is currently debt-free. There is no debt in the village of Thiensville, and we don't look to change that anytime soon. So it'd be great if we could work quickly and work together on that.
We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you, and we know you have a lot of work to do, so we'll leave you to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to both of you for waiting so long, too. Moving on to our consent agenda. The consent agenda includes meeting minutes of the Common Council. No. That's
like somebody else wanted to speak.
that item. Yeah. Okay.